Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Resilient Brevard Community Meeting number 2. We will be getting started in just a couple minutes. All right, it's 6 o'clock. I wanted to welcome everybody that's here to the Resilient Brevard Community Meeting number 2. We have a quick housekeeping slide. Just a few things. This meeting is being held in the webinar format this time. So we ask that you put questions and comments in the chat or in the Q&A. Please keep your lines muted, and there will be a period where we will be responding to comments and questions. This meeting is being recorded, so you'll be able to access it following the event. We will be holding an interactive session as well. And then everything regarding this meeting will be posted on the project website at www.periloflood.net/resilient-brevard. Now I wanted to turn it over to Ms. Vanessa Arnolds. She's going to provide the Spanish housekeeping instructions.
Good evening, everyone. Lamentamos tener la presentación disponible solo en inglés en estos momentos. Les vamos a pedir, por favor, que mantengan su micrófono apagado durante las presentaciones. Esta reunión está siendo grabada. Si prefiere comunicarse en español, por favor, escriba sus preguntas o comentarios con relación al proyecto en el chat de la reunión. Habrá un periodo para discutir las preguntas y comentarios al finalizar las presentaciones. Estos serán incluidos junto con las respectivas respuestas y la grabación de esta reunión en la página web del proyecto, que está en la parte inferior de la página, a la izquierda. También puede enviarnos un correo electrónico a resilientbrevard@ecfrpc.org o dejar un mensaje en el número telefónico 407-245-0300. Un miembro del equipo les responderá en español. Gracias por su participación. Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you. Hi, and I'd like to turn, okay.
Hi, I'm Jane Hart. I'm a planner from Brevard County Planning and Development Department, and I wanted to welcome everyone to the second public meeting for the Resilient Brevard project. And thank you all for taking the time to join us this evening. We have a full agenda tonight with a variety of subject experts lined up to speak, so I won't take up much time, but I did want to briefly recap on why we're here. As mentioned in the first meeting, the county launched the Resilient Brevard project late last year to take a comprehensive look at the coastal vulnerabilities specific to the unincorporated areas of Brevard County, and then provide recommendations and develop draft policies to reduce flood risk from natural hazards. To accomplish these goals, Brevard County partnered with the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council because of their regional expertise. In fact, they've completed resiliency projects for many of our neighboring cities and counties. The ECF RPC assembled a fantastic project team, including consultants from Florida Sea Grant and RW Parkinson Consulting, each bringing their own expertise and resiliency to this project. Funding for the Resilient Brevard project is through a grant by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. DEP's Resilient Coastlines program provides financial assistance to help prepare coastal communities for current and future effects of rising sea levels, including coastal flooding, erosion, and ecosystem changes. Ultimately, the recommendations that come out of this Resilient Brevard project will be presented at public hearings later this year to consider for adoption into the comprehensive plan and comply with the state of Florida's peril of flood statute. So although tonight is our last meeting under this grant project, it is really just the beginning of our resiliency journey. There'll be many additional opportunities for the Brevard community to participate in making our county more resilient to flooding hazards. So thank you again for attending this evening. And with that, I will turn it over to our host for tonight's meeting, Lori Cox from the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council.
Thank you, Jane. I'll briefly go over the agenda and note that I'm Lori. I'm a planner with the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council. It's my pleasure to be here with you this evening talking about how we can work together today and into the future to make Brevard County more resilient to natural hazards. We have a jam-packed agenda. Jane provided an overview of the project and the objectives. I'll be turning it over to Thomas Rupert from Florida Sea Grant to talk about policy opportunities and motivations, as well as other projects around the area. I will be providing an overview of the findings from the vulnerability analysis that we supported the county with, as well as recommendations that come from that analysis. Some strategies for resiliency. We'll have a presentation from Atkins North America to take a deeper dive into some of those strategies. We have some interactive features that we'd like to gather feedback from you through, and then we'll talk about next steps. So really quickly, our interactive feature here is that we're going to be using Mentimeter so that we can gather some of your feedback. So if everybody could go to their browser or on their computer and go to www.menti.com and then enter code 75589558. Can you see my screen? Thomas, will you wave? Can you see? Okay, thank you. I'll give you just a second to do that. If you have any questions or need assistance, please feel free to enter it into the chat. We have several people manning the chat to help you with any questions, as well as any technical support with this little exercise. So assuming that everybody's kind of gotten in, I see that we've got some activity. Can you see my screen with the Menti poll? Thomas, can you give me a wave if you can see the Mentimeter poll? Okay, thank you. So it looks like we've got a pretty good representation here, but we've got a lot of people, so I'd love to see some more participation. Some full-time residents, people who live and work in the county, property owners who don't live or work in the county. We've got about 36 people today, so come on, people. We'll have just a couple other questions where we can play with this again. got 16 total responses out of 17. I'll give it just another minute. We really wanted to understand who was joining us today to ensure that we are serving the whole community and the interests of everybody that lives, works, and plays in Brevard County. So 21. I know we've got some business community in the registration. All righty. So I will move on. You can keep voting until we get to our next one. So like Jane mentioned, our project objectives are to take a comprehensive look at the social, economic, and functional vulnerabilities from various types of flooding and other environmental hazards in the county, identify coastal vulnerabilities, as well as provide recommendations and draft policies to help alleviate, adapt to, and avoid flood risks from natural hazards, and also to become in compliance with peril flood statute. So just as a reminder, we talk about resilience, and we had mentioned this in the previous meeting, but it's always a good idea to be cognizant that when we're talking about resilience, we're talking about resilience in the capacity that it was noted in the East Central Florida Regional Resiliency Action Plan. Its resilience is the capacity of individuals, communities, institutions, businesses, systems within a region to plan, sustain, adapt, recover, and improve and grow collaboratively through actions and implementation strategies geared to address specific vulnerabilities. So there's the Regional Resiliency Action Plan, which was adopted by 14 municipalities, including Brevard and Volusia counties. So what does this mean for Brevard? This is the opportunity for Brevard to identify approaches to adapt, avoid, and recover from the impacts of natural hazards, while also positioning the county to take advantage of potential economic prosperity opportunities. And to dive deeper into those issues and those opportunities, I'm going to turn it over to Thomas Rupert from the Florida Sea Grant to take a deeper dive. Thomas, would you prefer to drive, or would you like me to?
I would love to do that if you can allow me.
There you go.
Okay. It's not allowing. Oh, you've got it up. Okay, perfect. Yes, thank you very much, Lori. And thank you everybody for being here today. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the policy, and this is going to be really a 30,000 foot view, just talking a little bit about policy related and some of the costs and opportunities that Brevard County has. So there is plenty of bad news. I'll try to go through it pretty quick because I could stick on the bad news for quite a long time, but we don't need to do that tonight. I think a lot of you are familiar with a lot of it. So Florida keeps growing. So we continue to put new development or densify development in some of the most hazard prone areas. And this comes with a lot of costs to the local governments. You have higher infrastructure costs, both those direct costs for trying to do the maintenance and upkeep on infrastructure that's more subject to hazards. And I've discussed in the previous meetings, some of the potential legal liability that can also attach to local government for that. It of course has large risk to human health and safety, as we have all seen, risk to property value. And then that last bullet there, I put some question marks behind it, not because there's any doubt that it will happen. The doubt is more related to when and at what scale, but there are real potential costs with insurance and bond rating issues. And each of those can have dramatic impacts to the county because if insurance rates go up, and particularly with the National Flood Insurance Program, then that has an impact on property owners and property values. And those impacts can then cascade into the bond rating issues. because bond companies want to look at a local government and know that their property values that they're basing repayment of bonds on are going to be stable. And that is a challenging proposition looking in the long term, as we'll discuss. And again, a lot of this can go back to the infrastructure. So in the upper left, you'll see a road that's been washing out and eroding and having problems.
Thomas,
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Your slides are not advancing. Do you want me?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Lori, we're still viewing your screen, Lori.
Okay, sorry.
So
We'll get this right, people, I promise.
Let me get the. One moment, a little bit of technical difficulty here to get my screen, the proper screen shared. Now, can you see my slide?
No. Yay.
How about now?
Yes,
Now we're good? Okay.
we're good.
So as I was saying, a lot of this goes back to the infrastructure. And the picture in the upper left, you can see where a road is washed out. That's not in Brevard County, it is St. John's. I've talked about the legal case that evolved out of that situation a lot. And it's been a tremendous cost for the county. And of course, all the houses you see developed there were developed decades after there had already been consistent erosion problems along that road. So again, there would have been a way for the county to avoid some of those costs had they done that in the past. And also this affects stormwater infrastructure. Just a little simple diagram there to kind of demonstrate how rising seawaters can impact the drainage system. And of course, that leads to neighborhood and road flooding. And then there are questions again about who is going to pay to alter those systems, and can local government afford to do that? And of course, more bad news is that this is not going to change anytime soon. It's only going to get worse, because here you can see some of the sea level rise curves that were adopted as part of the resilience efforts in East Central Florida. And you can see here that even if we're on, say, this curve, which is the NOAA 2012 high, there are a number of different potential curves here, but they all have one thing in common. You can pretty much disregard these bottom two. There's not much chance we're going to be on those trajectories. And if you look at any of these, they're all still going up. And at the end of 2100, and they are going to continue to go up for the foreseeable future. Most scientists would argue they will probably be going up for centuries. So I think that leads to another challenge that needs to be addressed eventually, which is the fact that what you do now to adapt to rising seas, something more will have to be done in the future. There are some bright lights, though, and some things you can look forward to. One, the Federal Emergency Management Agency has a new grant program called Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, affectionately known as BRIC. And BRIC is the replacement that FEMA has now for what used to be called FEMA's pre-disaster mitigation program. And this is funded not on a set amount that Congress allocates each year, but rather it's funded by a 6% set aside from federal post-disaster funding. And the federal post-disaster funding, if you've been paying attention over the past few years, has been massive. So this program has quite a bit of money available. And states and territories with major disaster declarations in the past 7 years are eligible to apply. So I think we can safely say that not only is Florida eligible today, but they probably will be for the foreseeable future in all likelihood. And BRIC is much, much broader than just pre-disaster mitigation program was. It allows projects on building codes. You can propose projects to do gap analysis for information gathering, projects on partnership development, capacity building, and even scoping to develop future larger BRIC proposals. And of course, BRIC also promotes innovation and big infrastructure projects. So it's a very, very broad ranging program with a lot of potential to assist local governments. And typically the review criteria include factors such as the project being cost effective, that the project reduces or eliminates risks and damage from natural hazards, and importantly, that it aligns with your hazard mitigation plan. And that is part of the reason you should be doing good planning. In addition, there's the proposed federal infrastructure plan and budget, and that has billions of dollars for different types of infrastructure. You've got 115 billion proposed for bridge, road, and highway repair. And in addition to all these other billions, it's 50 billion proposed at this point for, quote, infrastructure resiliency, unquote. And that is specifically related to helping communities withstand climate-related disasters. And the same is happening at the state level. So DeSantis had announced his proposal of millions of dollars to bolster Florida's resilience to future storms. And now they've increased this funding, proposed funding, proposing $1 billion now. And the legislature just last Friday passed Senate Bill 1954 that creates not only a statewide Office of Resilience and commits the state to developing a statewide sea level rise projection, but it also promotes funding for local governments to do vulnerability analyses and other work related to resilience and sea level rise. So there's a lot of potential funding out there. One thing all of this has in common, is so germane to the discussion tonight and the work that's going on in Brevard County and with the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council, is that when this funding starts to happen, it's going to happen quickly. Excuse me. You get grant requests for proposals coming out, and the local governments that have done their planning, that are prepared, have ideas for specific projects. They are the ones that are going to get the money. So if you in Brevard County really take the opportunity, you have the option or the possibility of getting some real funding for your projects. And so while I talk about the good and the bad, ultimately, I just don't really see that it's just about that. You really need to take those and incorporate them with each other and be pragmatic in the approach. So obviously, Brevard County needs to do what it can right now to protect people. And that's extremely important, in doing that planning up front and being prepared to take advantage of funding streams, whether they're from the federal or state government or even private entities. But at the same time, you really need to be doing the work today in the context of the longer term picture, because that does not look like it's going to change. Sea levels, as I mentioned, will continue to rise for a very long time. So any project you do now, I like to say that they're not a solution, because to me, the word solution implies a long-term fix. What you're doing actually when you adapt to sea level rise is just that you're adapting to a future that is not all that far away. The longer term future is going to need different solutions or different adaptations. And so there are a lot of key questions, I think, to ask in order to be able to understand just the difference between doing what you need right now, doing what you need to do right now to protect people and infrastructure versus the long-term realities. You have to start asking questions about, is there enough money to continue down the path of armoring, protecting, and elevating buildings and infrastructure? How long can you improve that infrastructure for changed conditions? And that last bullet on this slide is getting more and more attention. I think that will help local governments better understand their long-term situation. Also, have your development patterns in the past been done in a way that they actually financially support themselves? Or is yesterday's growth being paid for by tomorrow's growth? Have you assessed the vulnerability of your infrastructure? And then a crucial point is under what conditions and over what time scale. If you're going out 50 years, that's good. That is very good. But in the very long term, are you developing options there? And are you looking at or using the FFRMS? And that's an acronym for the Federal Flood Risk Management Standard. That is a standard that was developed over several years and first put into effect over 5 years ago. Then it was taken out of effect during the last federal administration, even though when the federal
Was up there this morning.
Yeah, it's not there now.
Go tell Dad.
when the federal administration took
Go in the
that,
bathroom. It was up
revoked
there
the
this morning.
executive order.
Well,
Lori, I
then he
think
needs
you're
to
not
deal
on
with
mute.
him. One of them took it because it was there this morning when I
Lori.
went to work.
I
Was
believe
it
you're
there
not
when I
on
got
mute.
from work
I didn't,
or school?
I don't know. I wasn't paying attention.
So the federal flood risk management standard, even when it was revoked by the Trump administration, HUD, or Housing and Urban Development, and the US Army Corps of Engineers continued to use that because they saw it as such a valuable tool. And at the local level, if you have federal projects, that will be required. And it's also a really good idea to look into that as a more protective standard for your infrastructure more generally. And then ultimately, is there going to come a time that you just can't do more protection and it turns out to be throwing good money after bad? You know, do you know where this will happen, and do you know when? And if not, when will you try to identify this point so that you're making the most efficient possible use of your resources? And with that, I'll leave you with a little cartoon. And I look forward to questions later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas. Let's see if I can reconnect. Just a moment. Can you see my screen? All right, thank you. So just as a reminder, this project was not there. This project was divided into 3 main tasks. The vulnerability analysis was the meatier of the tasks, and that included community engagement as well as desktop analysis. So we conducted the vulnerability analysis consisting of data-driven analytics as well as information provided by you all. We coordinated with the various other departments and divisions within the county to understand where current policy is applied and how opportunities to create more functional resiliency in the county can be created. We held an online survey, which many of you participated in. We collected we collected 758 responses on strategies you'd support, as well as vulnerable areas of the county where you'd apply them. Those strategies are being written into policy recommendations that the county will then carry into future project work as well as policy adoption. So that will be the next stage of this project. Here are the criteria for peril of flood. We've talked about it quite a bit, but these were the criteria that we utilized to audit the comprehensive plan as well as the land development code to see where the county currently aligns with peril of flood and in terms of redevelopment principles and strategies to reduce flood risk, best practices for removal of property from the coastal, from flood zones and from high hazard areas, site development techniques that may reduce losses. And then those were the main 3 that we focused on, but we also looked at where the county is consistent with flood resistant construction requirements, regulation of construction, seaward of the coastal construction control line, and encouraging the local government to participate in the insurance program rating system, which they are. Once the comprehensive plan is found in compliance with peril of flood, Brevard County will join the other communities that have also gone through this process. Those are all in green. Melbourne Beach is also in process, and then Cocoa Beach, Grant, Valcaria are in different stages as well. Turning to the vulnerability analysis on the data side, we examined the impact on critical facilities in developed area, in the undeveloped areas, excuse me, and developed areas of unincorporated Brevard County from flooding, storm surge, sea level rise, and then also sea level rise plus surge. And we developed scenarios consistent to what's the years within the East Central Florida Regional Resilience Action Plan for 2040, 2070, and 2100 to look at the current term, the midterm, and the long term, consistent with the developmental life cycle, a lot of the critical facilities and critical infrastructure to Brevard County. For this analysis, we utilize the total water level approach, which is calculating and forecasting the total combination of tides, surge, sea level rise, and flood events. Of note is the coastal high hazard area, which is defined as the area below the elevation of the Category 1 storm surge line as established by the SLOSH model. We utilize that in our calculations to show you areas of vulnerability to storm surge. Just a quick note, this was the mapping tool that was in the community survey where those who took the survey showed us areas of vulnerability as well as where certain strategies that would be recommended to be applied. We found overlap with those areas that you noted, as well as through the vulnerability analysis when we created or developed the surge evaluation for present day. So you can see that all the areas in red are those areas that would be classified as within that Category 1 storm surge area. Continuing on with the vulnerability analysis, here's an overview of the findings related to those areas of impact. So as you can see, we've got acreage, significant acreage that is impacted with sea level rise up to 1.85 feet by 2040. By 27, almost 5 feet, and then 2100, 8.45 feet. Much of the acreage is impacted by the 100-year floodplain. And then we also have acreage, it's within the Cat 3, Cat 4, and Cat 5 storm surge zones. And if I can get my mouse back, I will advance the slide. So in terms of the area that's within the 100-year floodplain, we wanted to show you the top 5 land uses that would be impacted. Up to 84% of the public conservation land use is impacted by the 100-year floodplain. So that acreage is in conservation, but we're also seeing that agriculture is impacted. 67% of the acreage that's in agriculture is impacted by the 100-year floodplain, as well as the residential 1 to 2.5, and residential 4 land use categories. Of interest are what critical facilities are impacted. This is a much more condensed list. I just took out, I condensed it down into those critical facilities that are impacted by 3 or more of the hazards. So the list is much longer, and that data will be available in the report, but just so that you could get an overview, you can see what are the critical facilities that are impacted by 3 or more hazards. So how do we respond to the vulnerability analysis? As Thomas stated, there are no real solutions, but there will continue to be natural hazards. Strategies and adaptations are recommended through this project that include resilient policy and design. And because of the dynamic nature of the natural hazards, resiliency is going to require some flexibility and reevaluation. As such, the county will continue to evaluate its resiliency strategy and ensure the county can be proactive and responsive to the changing dynamics of environmental hazards. So what we heard from you, or for those folks that took the community survey, this is a snapshot of the top 3 ranked priority areas and strategies you weighed in on through that survey. More people voted for and ranked the highest nature-based strategies. Those included some draft recommendations that included adopting growth patterns that support nature-based, support nature. I didn't finish the slide, I had a note there, but support nature and natural resiliency, enhance land use to protect surface water. And then in terms of public services and safety, establishing resilient utilities, natural stormwater management, and then health and equity, looking at strategies around green and natural infrastructure and phasing out septic. So with that, I wanted to turn it over to Joanna Switzer. She's with Atkins North America. She's going to take a deeper dive into sustainability and resiliency opportunities, especially the green infrastructure that was ranked so high through the community vulnerability analysis. So Joanna, did you want to navigate your slides? If so, I can turn it over to you, or I can push the button for you.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yeah, hi.
Excellent, sorry, took me a
That's
second.
okay.
So forgive me, what am I gonna do if I'm gonna advance it?
I can hand you the control, you can share.
Okay.
I can hand you the control, and I think you can navigate from my screen, if that would.
No, you have to navigate, Lori.
Okay, perfect. Then we'll just, I guess, move on to the next slide. Thanks, Lori.
My pleasure.
So we wanted to just open up with a little fact here that most people probably aren't even aware of, or they certainly don't think about it when we have these discussions about the environment and resilience. But the simple fact is that we're surrounded by something that's as valuable as the tropical rainforest on all sides of Florida. And it just highlights a couple of key concepts we want to drive home with our discussions tonight. One being that nature is the ultimate engineer. And if we want to look to maximizing resiliency opportunities, we should look to nature as much as possible to avoid fighting against the inevitable. And 2, you know, it's really going to require some creative solutions and some open minds to find the most cost-effective and logical solutions for resilience in our built environment. With that, I'm going to hand it over to my associate, Chris, to take it from here. On the next slide, sorry. You may have to, yeah, you have to give him a unmute. I'm sorry.
All right, you there now?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So, you know, Brevard County is certainly not alone in this process right now. There's a lot of communities across the country that are struggling with how do we look at adaptation and resilience and sustainability and build a better environment socially and natural solutions to everything. So I think it's great that there's opportunities to help build your community in a better way going forward. And it's everything from how we strategize, where we put infrastructure, how we do it. And, you know, even down there towards the bottom with Mexico Beach and resilient redevelopment, I mean, there's no stopping the hurricanes on top of sea level rise and other factors we're facing. Next. Go next, Joanna. Oh, okay, we're just...
I'm sorry, just lagging. Sorry.
Sorry, there was
All right. And kind of to Thomas's point earlier, I mean, there are some good things we're finding out lately, and that's that there's a much bigger appetite to really look at solving these issues regionally and with these somewhat mega projects where we're looking at partnering with Army Corps of Engineers and FEMA and state groups to really look at making solutions. Because, buying out a house here and there, that's really not an effective solution to enhancing some of the natural systems that we have in our state. Next slide. And we'll deal with the lag here in a second. So as it's coming up here, yeah, we're looking at, there are some communities that have dealt with peril of flood. And I guess maybe they're a little further down the path than Brevard is. So I just want to touch on what we're seeing from those type of clients that have already started to peel the onion back, because there's a lot of overlapping things that are going on once you look into resilience and sustainability. And, some is targeting that areas of their community that they want to put infrastructure and investments into. And that's, some of this adaptation action areas and overlay district approach. And some of this, from the government perspective is if we want to develop in a way that we haven't really developed too much in before, can we do that? Does our comprehensive plan allow us to, which is part of this peril of flood? And from the land development code side, can you really implement some of these higher standards that you're probably going to want to do in the future? So some of the other kind of key topics here is a lot of green infrastructure guidance. We're talking about that here tonight. But really, to do it in your community, the best thing we can do is kind of help everybody look at what that path looks like. What does it look like from a developer's perspective, from the county's perspective, and city's perspective, and from homeowners. So a lot of communities are building guidance documents. And then, the other thing is, if we're going to design and build in a new way, some of the math changes on how we implement these procedures. Some of these things are more expensive. Some of them take longer to implement and get a return on investment. Some of them, as Joanna will talk about later, when we do like flex spaces and things that change over time, how are we dealing with disposal of assets as things turn over and get changed? So want to move on to the next slide, Joanna? Or whoever's driving. So here's just a simple diagram. Some of those topics before, those were some of the trends on some of that soft code and policy side. On the infrastructure side, a lot of it is where do we go and how do we go from gray to green, or a hybrid system of solutions from the engineering side. So a lot of these here, this is just, remember this picture in your mind, because this is some of these ecosystems that are overlapping in a community. And what Joanna's going to do is show you some really cool examples of how different communities, both in other countries as well as other parts of the state, are implementing these things.
Thanks. So next slide. Oh, sorry, one more, Chris.
And this was just to give you guys the short version. And I think Lori and Tara have done this earlier. It's just, you guys like green infrastructure. So we're going to show you some examples of how communities are implementing that right now.
Exactly. Thanks, Chris. So next slide, Lori. And because we've heard that nature-based solutions is the best fit for Brevard, and Brevard is obviously very concerned about Indian River Lagoon and some of the crisis situations happening there with the habitat and the manatees, we wanted to bring the best that we've been able to pull together to date on trends, global down to what we're used to seeing in our own environment, our own ecosystems. So on the global side, we've got Vancouver Project, which is a phenomenal case study for anybody who wants to just look into more holistic, sort of multifaceted master planning. This is a case where the city sort of took the reins and handled a concept master plan of the largest undeveloped tract of land on the waterfront coastal inlet of Northeast False Creek. They are intending to privatize it. Obviously, it's going to be parceled out and broken into privatized projects, a mix of public and private. But the idea was to sort of incorporate all these critical things that needed to happen, infrastructure updates that needed to happen just because of aging systems or the growing population, in addition to improvements to multimodal transportation and looking at resilience and social justice issues. On the sort of resilient side, just since we're limited on time, it's a great project. I have to focus on the resilience piece of it. A couple of key things that they did that I think could be adapted and used within the Brevard County environment. One being just trying to raise awareness. One of the biggest challenges is helping people who don't think about this stuff day to day and maybe don't even care to understand and embrace why some of the ordinances and why some of the changes are coming down the pipe. And they have included sea level rise graphics in public areas to sort of help alert people to what is coming, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years down the line. So they better understand and get behind some of the decisions happening. The other things they're doing is, in addition to, obviously, there's some engineered seawall that's already in place within the inlet, but they are bringing back natural and sort of softening the living shore aspects of their inlet. They'll be preserving some open space down around the waterline specifically for living shore, obviously adapted to their Pacific Northwest climate, and having some marsh and other naturalistic features. They have a large hillside that's already there. They're going to be seismically reinforcing it so that it can serve as sort of a buffer, if you will, a gigantic living shore for outdoor events. But then when they need it, it will serve other purposes like sea level rise, tsunamis, landslides, and earthquakes that they have to contend with there. We can go to the next slide. Closer to home, in New Orleans and in the Gulf Coast, obviously, I think that's kind of the ground zero event for a lot of us. It was a wake up call for all the coastal communities to recognize that they missed that bullet and it could have been for them. The flood damage and the long and arduous, just excruciating aftermath went on for over a decade. We were all there witnessing it. And I think a lot of us have kind of gone about our business, kind of putting it in the back of our minds. Well, the reality is that New Orleans is still contending with its aftermath in the sense that they have not really fully implemented resilience and improvements to stormwater that if they were to have another event like that, they'd be ready. It's business as usual as long as the weather's good. But some of the strategies that they're implementing that we thought were completely noteworthy and relevant to the Brevard County community are their introduction of blue strategies, which basically in the past, the Corps of Engineers and some of the older mindsets were to just conceal water under the streets, make as much usable hardscape as possible, and get the water out of the city and keep it out. Now they're starting to embrace water and bring it back into the city through canals and stream type features. The benefits with these is that unlike a pipe that's just sized to a certain capacity and cannot handle anymore, or storm drains that are sized to only take in so much water influx at a time, the nuisance flooding has been an ongoing problem within New Orleans. It's low lying, the slope is very low slope, so getting water out is hard. It's something we all contend with in these sort of bayou and wetland coastal environments. So they have these larger features now that they're capturing for linear parks that will allow them greater capacity and flexibility. Water level goes up, water level goes down. It gives them that added benefit. It also allows them to incorporate exercise, passive recreation, and more pedestrian and bike friendly traffic paths. So they're trying to make it a win-win across the board. We can move on to the next slide. Now, in the case of nature being the ultimate engineer, it's just noteworthy that whenever we try to restore something on a larger scale, not necessarily like the living shore projects that are going on around Brevard, but on a larger scale where there's multiple facets to ecosystems, and there's also criteria that need to be met to preserve it under major storm events. We have to often employ different simulation models to better understand. Our partnership has gotten to be so much closer in the name of resilience between our eco-science department and our hard engineering department, if you will. So this is one example of a very successful project, but it required a lot of studies to make sure that what nature manages to do over millennia, we're trying to artificially recreate to mimic nature as closely as possible. So it's something just to keep in mind for large scale projects. It's ultimately man-made, but we're trying to mimic nature as closely as possible and make sure we strike that balance. In this case, there were just acres upon acres of marshland and grasses that were basically reinstated. And that provides significant resilience benefit in the sense that it helps to break the energy of those storms coming in onto shore. So that's one of the major benefits of this project. We can go to the next slide. even closer to home, over in Tampa, which is also a very low-lying community, nuisance flooding has been a problem for years, and it's continued to increase. And with storm level rise or sea level rise and other increasing storm events, we're finding even no-name storms are creating situations where communities are cut off, cars and properties are flooded, and emergency response can't even get to isolated areas of the peninsula. So one example of a win-win project has been this lower watershed McDill 48 Park. It had been through a land trust sort of deeded over to the city, but it was laying fallow, and it had been a wetland that sort of had the water redirected by engineered stormwater systems. In this sort of partnership arrangement, the Southwest Florida Water Management District funding allowed the city to move forward with this to reinstate and replenish the wetland. So correcting engineering of the past, if you will. Instead of having nuisance flooding and overtaxed systems on the street side, water is being redirected through improved engineering to this wetland, where it will be able to create a habitat and a passive recreation destination for the community. And it will also provide critical water treatment. So the water as it resides in this wetland is being naturally processed and filtered before it's discharged to Tampa Bay, which was one of the major concerns of SwiftMud with respect to water quality issues. So it's a win-win. Again, another example of how multiple stakeholder organizations were at the table to make sure critical trees were preserved, that the optimal wetland function was preserved, and that everybody's needs were being met. This is something that, again, is an example of something that could be adapted for public or public-private projects in the Brevard area. We can go to the next slide. Another example of stakeholder engagement, I think COVID's gotten us all more used to using social media and online tools, such as our Zoom session tonight, is this development that's being sort of initially framed out down in Martin County. The developer has been seeking input from anybody who wants to give him input on his plan. His plan on his website outlines what he's hoping to accomplish, but he's looking to hear from the average Joe citizen, as well as any other special interest groups that may have concerns about conservation or perhaps wildlife corridors, jobs in the community, whatever they may want out of a major community, to make sure that he's incorporating that into the plan. So again, just something to highlight ways that we have to engage people and to make sure that the projects that we move forward are the best fit. Next slide. And because Brevard is such a proponent for the environment and for the wildlife habitats, it behooves us to sort of mention there are some other opportunities as we start to grow our community at a rapid pace again. Florida is certainly a unique environment. People come from all over the world to visit our habitats and to see our varied wildlife. As we grow our systems and as we have to contend with rising seawater or sea levels in addition to nuisance flooding, it's worth noting that we have some opportunities to look out for wildlife as well as to benefit our citizens on a day-to-day basis through connectivity built into the environment of roadways and other projects. This example shows how in a period of 5 months, one male panther managed to cover about 800 miles and got hit by a car at least once in the process. They believe that he was in search of a mate. So it just goes to show how as land becomes more locked off and developed, it becomes harder for wildlife to navigate and to survive and to propagate the species. So we have some examples here of ways that we can integrate solutions to benefit everybody as we start to work on our adaptation models. Next slide. Another option to consider, since we have limited time, the idea of what can we do with coastal communities or on coastal properties that there's a lot of debate about what resilient built environment looks like. Should people build there? Should they not build there? What should they build? One hybrid scenario would be to consider opportunities to minimize the built environment, thereby allowing greater buffer for any kind of storm waters coming in addition to minimizing the built property damage potential when there is an event. So just a couple scenarios just to highlight possibilities. These are certainly not all the possibilities out there, but just a couple. One being in the center, you can see the outdoor amphitheater at Seaside, Florida. And below, you can see that same amphitheater that's been filled from a major storm event. I can't remember which hurricane, it was tied to one of the hurricanes. This kind of solution allows land to be used day to day for enjoyment and all kinds of purposes, whether it's for private, ownership or whether it's public land. It also shows how for those extreme events or resilience for future events, it can have some purpose, whether it's catching storm surge waters along the coastline or whether it's inland and there's nuisance flooding that needs to be captured somewhere. This is one example of how that can be adapted. We've included an image of the Cocoa Riverfront Park as well, just to show how we're not saying this project needs to be retrofitted, but we're just saying there may be opportunities as well that municipalities can look at ways to retrofit strategically to garner some of these added resilience features and to provide some benefit to built environment elements they've already invested in. Another concept is on the left-hand side, which is the idea of just because you want a restaurant or just because you want an event venue doesn't mean everything has to be hard construction. This would be an example of how some leniency or some discussions and some code modifications might be necessary through a public-private partnership. The idea of bringing in food trucks or other mobile elements and allowing that to be the primary function, and then that allows things to be evacuated in the case of a major storm. There were other examples we wanted to show you guys that are similar to this that are happening, and in some cases even on the beach in the Pensacola environment and their recovery after the last hurricane there. So something to consider. Next slide. Low impact development is something that's been a major facet of design for a while in the Florida market. It's sort of a best practice. If it hasn't been fully codified at this point, most of the major municipalities are expecting to see it. It differs from the older method being piping water and it disappears underground and it goes by larger pipes to some other mystery location where it stays and perhaps it overflows into the natural environment and perhaps it doesn't. The low impact development model is intended to mimic nature as closely as possible. And there's various benefits to it that we have highlighted here. Some of the key benefits, again, is that the closer you mimic nature, the better off you are in general because nature is the ultimate engineer. But it also allows flexibility because pipes can only be sized for a certain assumption by the engineers. And if they can't handle an increasing influx, then there are obviously going to be nuisance flooding issues. We're going to look at a few of the options. There are plethora. The biggest benefits with this is that it can be adapted and there are creative solutions to incorporate in almost every type of project. The biggest features to keep in mind is that the goal is to minimize or reduce the amount of impervious or hard surfaces that take away from the natural environment's ability to absorb water. That could be rooftops, it could be roads, it could be driveways, you name it. So trying to reduce that. The second item would be trying to decentralize stormwater being piped to some other location, having lots of little solutions on site or nearby, including even rainwater harvesting as potential solutions to reuse the water and to let the aquifer recharge with the least potential for toxins or infiltration of other contaminants that would get into the ecosystems downstream. Next slide. So what does that look like? Well, there's an endless array of creative solutions, but just a few examples to sort of hone in on to give this more concrete concept. The clustering idea is something that's been adopted by a lot of the more neo-traditional or urban revival neighborhood concepts. The idea being having smaller yards, and not just because the houses are gigantic, but just closer together with the idea that that allows more habitat to be conserved or some combination of habitat and shared open space that could be used by the neighbors. In these cases, this is a good starting point for implementing low impact development in a residential scale or even in a commercial scale, clustering things and leaving open space to work with. Now within the open space, whatever's left, there are different options. A bioswale to the top left is one example of how something can, with just a little advanced planning and grading and sloping, it can provide some control and management and infiltration of stormwater and rainwater on site without flooding houses or streets. But it can also provide a play field or a lawn or an event space that can be shared by the neighbors or the community, whatever setting it's in. To the bottom left, we see how materials like crushed shell and other alternatives to paving that we've become so used to now can allow, again, more infiltration on site instead of it just running off and having to be contained or managed downstream. So minimizing a problem by minimizing the amount of impervious surface by having open absorbent materials. On the right-hand side, we see some things that are not as common now, but could be easily adapted to Brevard communities or Brevard settings. On the top right, we see a scenario where conservation development, meaning preserving as much of the natural habitat as possible, or native landscaping practices after the fact, can naturally function a lot like bioswales and rain gardens. Deep leaf litter, organic materials in the soils, and native plants, including tree canopy, are known to help infiltrate and retain water on site instead of allowing it to run off. Again, subject to some conditions with the soil types, but as a general rule of thumb, they're very effective. In a more manicured setting, such as a retail or office environment, or even public settings in a municipality down the main street, some rain gardens can be very manicured and very formal. Most people consider rain gardens to be something that's sort of a backyard homespun appearance, but we included this image to highlight the fact that they can be modern, they can be minimalist, they can even be incorporated into sort of an art garden setting. So there's definitely ways to adapt all of these, strategies to different needs and different styles and budgets. And these are only a handful. So next slide. Also critical, especially within the Brevard environment and in Florida in general, we've got water everywhere. And sometimes it's fresh water, and sometimes it's a river, and sometimes it's a sinkhole, and sometimes it's on the coast. In each of those cases, any engineered scenario where we're going to be having man-made development, man-made landscape, any kind of ongoing landscape maintenance that might involve pesticides or fertilizers, it's critical to understand and keep in mind that we have ordinances already in place to protect the natural waterways. We want to keep fertilizers and pesticides and any contaminants and toxins out of the water for obvious reasons. One way that that's done is by a standoff distance from having any application of those materials. Now, that's only useful if the landscape contractor and the homeowners or the property owners understand that rule and manage to maintain that rule. The other rule of thumb is that assumes that any water rushing off of that is being filtered and caught by something that does not have fertilizer and pesticides. So the rule of thumb is to use native or other low maintenance plantings that can help catch and filter anything that may be washing off from any fertilization or other contaminants uphill, if you will. There are, at the link below, also programs in place, as well as some individuals that are certified as having been trained. So there's definitely community programs to get the word out and to make sure that people are getting the people that are well informed about these requirements. Next slide.
Hey, Joanna, I think we're running kind of long here. I don't know
I'm
if there's
sorry.
Opportunity. I know you're very passionate about this. I just want to be cognizant of everybody's time. If you want to maybe jump to
I
the last
apologize.
slide.
I have absolutely no clock in front of me. I apologize. So from a resilience standpoint, we don't have enough time to go into all the benefits of the offshore estuary environments, the marshes, seagrasses, and other aspects. But it just is worth noting that there's a lot more awareness now, and there's a lot more advocacy occurring related to their benefits in reducing the impact and power of hurricanes and other coastal storms. So in addition to preserving our ecosystem and the environment and the economies that rely on that, they also have direct benefits for resilience and storm resistance. Next slide. And obviously there's a lot of good work happening in Brevard related to preservation and restoration of living shores. The living shores obviously in the marine environment are critical for the habitat for the manatees and some of the other critical issues ongoing right now. The soil tax funded projects are worth noting. We've included website information in this PowerPoint for those that are not aware of those. There's a website dedicated to it, but some of the key ones ongoing right now is basically restoring the soil quality, if you will, by removing contaminants to allow seagrass to reestablish, which is critical for the manatee survival. In addition to the different filter feeder restoration of oysters, clams, and mangroves, and septic to sewer. We can go to the next slide. And so there's a lot of really great resources out there now. And I guess they're going to keep getting advanced. And at some point, some of these things might be codified. And as far as what requirements are for low impact development, that still stands to see what other resilience-based increases or changes to those codes might be coming down the pipe. And with that, just want to thank you guys for your patience and your time. I apologize for running over. We really appreciate the Resilience Committee's offer to allow us to come and share with you guys tonight, and we look forward to serving you guys.
Thank you. That was great. I think my biggest takeaway from that presentation was we can have everything and more, and the opportunity for creative partnerships to achieve multiple objectives, as well as the opportunity for funding through the variety of different agencies that may be able to participate in some of these creative solutions. So back to the community survey, as well as our related to the vulnerability analysis and some of the strategies that we are proposing through this plan to respond to what the community has asked for. Looking at nature-based strategies, potentially implementing adaptation action areas, evaluating buffers for water quality and water quality protection and protection from flooding, because those are two different things, and those buffers have different purposes. So also evaluating relocating utilities outside of the coastal high hazard area, developing a green and nature-based infrastructure plan, implementing some of those features that Joanna went through, as well as some other strategies that the county can develop depending on the unique circumstances in that area. And then honing in on identifying funding mechanisms for funding these nature-based infrastructure improvements and maintenance long-term. So with that, I'll turn it over to the Mentimeter again. A few people have already been playing with it. Can somebody give me a nod and tell me if you can see do you support the county moving forward with these strategies, the Mentimeter screen?
Yes, we can see it, Lori.
Thanks. So same instructions as before. We'd like to get your feedback on what the county should move forward with some of these strategies. And these are just a few. There will be quite a few more, including an audit of the comp plan with recommended policies in the comp plan, recommended land development strategies. But here's some of the highlights, and we'd like to get your feedback. So I'll give a couple minutes. I see we have 11 responses so far. I really want to thank everybody for your time this evening. We are wrapping up here following just a couple more slides, so we'll get y'all off to dinner. We appreciate your feedback. If you have any questions or comments, please do put them in the chat. We've got a wonderful team of folks manning it at this time. Looks like people are thinking. I've got 21 responses. And then we have one more Mentimeter slide following this one, if y'all haven't moved ahead in your homework. So I haven't seen the dials change in the last couple of seconds, so I will move on to the next one. If So here are just a couple of examples. I wish I could have gotten bigger graphics and more graphics, because there are just so many great examples of ways of implementing low impact design features to also provide those environmental services that the county is seeking to implement to protect the water quality as well as life and property. So here's just a couple of examples. Green Roof's got some love. So we've got 17 total responses, and I'll give it just a couple more minutes, or maybe a minute more. All right, I don't see you're moving anymore. So, oh, got one more response. So that's what we have in terms of presentations for this evening. I'd like to open it up to any questions that may have come through the chat. Anything that we might want to address directly while we have everybody together?
There are no questions currently in chat. A
Wow.
question and answer box.
Okay. Sorry, the Q&A, yeah. Oh, we have one more coming in.
Great. So I'll hand this off to Randy. Christina asked the question if the Indian River Lagoon will see sea level rise.
So thank you very much. Excellent. Right. So the Indian River Lagoon, which is connected to the ocean through the inlets, and also the barrier island is porous. So the waters under it are in equilibrium with the ocean. We'll see the same rise as the global sea level rise, as Thomas indicated earlier with those graphics. So it'll all be in equilibrium, and we're looking at between 2 and 8 feet by the end of the century, and by 2050 certainly 2 feet. So that's what we're looking at. It's all connected, and we're going to get what everybody else gets.
Thank you, Randy.
Then we
Tara,
have-
go ahead.
I'll throw this out to our folks at Atkins. What about glyphosate by the county to clean the vegetation from ditches? After all, once the vegetation dies and the nutrients collect, will flow into the IRL. How does vegetative swales help? So maybe you guys are able to answer that question.
I was waiting to see if one of my other associates were going to jump in. This is Joanna. I guess I'm trying to understand, the concern is that if there is vegetation in a swale, the assumption is that that swale is also being fertilized for the vegetation. The general rule of thumb would be, obviously there have to be licensed management teams that remove any kind of muck and it doesn't get washed out, and that those particular plantings would not necessarily be fertilized. They're there to survive in the environment without having any added contaminants put into it because they're there for filtration. I don't know if that answers the question.
You can unmute Michael to see if that answered the question. I'm looking for him. Hold on. All right, Michael, if you wanted to add anything else, you're unmuted. You just have to unmute yourself on your end.
I think, can you hear me? Maybe I'm there. I don't see a mute. Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, what I'm concerned about here is, well, let's just current events. Last December, we had a tiny little sewage spill of 7.2 million gallons that landed into the Indian River Lagoon. But what we found when we were investigating that was that our county has been using pesticides to keep those littoral plantings in the stormwater ponds at Sandpoint Park down. Well, if you're growing plantings in the water to remove nutrients from the water so that they're then to be mechanically harvested and taken away, that's one thing. But if you're going to grow littoral plantings in the pond to remove nutrients and then kill the plants with Roundup, they're just going to die. Those nutrients go back into the water and it all ends up going out into the lagoon, including the glyphosate and the Roundup. So what I'm asking is, what good does it do for us to do all these wonderful plans if the county implements them in such a way that it's doing more harm?
Maintenance is a challenge, and maintenance is obviously very important. So it definitely warrants some
littoral plantings along the IRL, because we're in the process now of having a new parking lot put in on our beach on the other side of the Max Brewer Causeway. That parking lot is specifying a seawall 5 feet away from the edge of where the water line is, because our beach is no longer 80 feet wide, it's only 30 feet wide. But the point is that if they're putting a seawall in there, they're supposed to be following Titusville's planting regulations, which require no seawall and only littoral plantings. So the county came to the city to ask for a variance so that the county could put a seawall in instead of littoral plantings, where we happen to have the highest breeding population of horseshoe crabs in the country.
So this is Dr. Randall Parkinson. The challenge we have is, if we could get the detention ponds to be deep enough to be up beyond the photic zone of these plants, then we wouldn't have the depressions being infiltrated by exotic, opportunistic plants. But the problem we have is that the groundwater table is so close that if you you can't dig it deep enough without it flooding automatically. This is a challenge that we face in Brevard County, so that traditional options are not available to us. And that's why many of our retention ponds have vegetation in them, because they're not deep enough. But if you get them too deep, then they fill up anyway. So they are an important element, but they create a new challenge, as you specified there. And these questions didn't come up 10 years ago. They're coming up now, and it's an important example of progress as we try to figure out what to do. And we've got new questions, and we'll have to figure out new ways. I understand your concern, but we're limited in what we can do with traditional means of mitigation. And again, your point is well taken, and it's something that we need to think about and figure out as we move forward.
This is Bach McClure. I'm with Brevard County Stormwater. I'm the section manager. We're under Department of Natural Resources, and we've also been having, I mean, this same sort of discussion is, hey, how do we balance the need to keep the ditches, the vegetation in the ditch systems down so that it's not causing flooding, and at the same time, reducing the amount of nutrients that are going to the lagoon and things discharging. Unfortunately, for some of the exotics, primrose is one of our big current headaches. The only way to keep the primrose down, as invasive exotic, it grows almost a bush size, is either mechanical removal or spraying it to kill it. And neither, the spraying to kill it is not anybody's favorite option. But on the other hand, we have hundreds of miles of ditch system in the county that if we had to do mechanical removal for all of those ditch systems, the cost would be outrageous. Nobody would want to pay that cost. So we're stuck with, trying to do the good things with littoral zones and the floated vegetative islands and all the rest of the removal strategies that we're trying to do. And at the same time, recognizing that we can't do the best thing as far as keeping nutrients out of the lagoon every time. And it's a constant tension between the two. And we appreciate that you're concerned about it, and we're struggling with the same issues. What's the best way to handle this? So anyway, that's I'm not trying to discount your concerns. I'm trying to say we're struggling with the same issues internally, as well as what you see in the public side. So anyway, I hope that helps.
Great. One more question. What are you looking at for building code on the Barrier Islands, on stilts like in the Keys and metal roofs? ? So anyone want to tackle that one?
Well, this is Dr. Parkinson. So that would be an adaptation action. But then your homes are higher, but your roads aren't. So even though your home doesn't flood, you can't get to it. So, we have to be thinking bigger than that. And, and we have to be thinking about, like, one municipality might be totally resilient, but then they're connected to the next, which is why, a very broad approach is most important. But, mitigating individual homes or individual businesses isn't going to be enough, because, you have to get there, and then you have to have the water and the sewer and the roads, the electricity, which is why Resilient Brevard is where we need to be right now. We need to be thinking big picture. Thank you.
This is Bach McClure again. One of the other things that goes along with that is what level of resilience are we aiming for? The 2-foot rise projection for 2050, and then more than that by 2100. We have roads that currently flood along the lagoon and in the lower lying areas with smaller storms. We'll have standing water on the roadways, and we're having erosion along significant portions of those roadways along the lagoon. So we're already struggling with, what do we do with those roads, and how do we handle, if we just raise the road, now everybody uphill from the road has water when it rains backing up on them. But if we do piped connections, it floods. And one of the common suggestions is the flaps or backflow prevention on the pipes that lead out to the lagoon then. So, okay, you can take the stormwater out, but you don't keep the flooding out. The problem is those pipes, those controls are usually designed for temporary flooding, like a tidal situation. When the lagoon comes up and starts flooding, it's not tidal, it's storm driven and rainfall driven, and it tends to last quite a while. Those that live along know the same sort of thing. So, and those structures also take a certain amount of pressure to open them. So you end up actually making your runoff problems worse uphill while trying to solve your flooding problems from lagoon side. So there's, yeah, I'm sorry.
This is the critical issue: is what are we designing for? What elevation? And do we look at the sea level rise scenarios and design for a lower, and then have to go back and redo it? And how much is that? So, in my opinion, we should be designing for a higher level of sea level rise, which is inevitable because current CO2 emissions are, the lower two NOAA projections that Thomas showed earlier. We've already missed that. So we need to be realistic. We do not want to do this again, but the challenge is that it is overwhelming in the sense that when you think about the higher levels, then there's a lot more area that will be underwater and a lot higher elevations. This is the issue that we face right now. I'm happy to say that we're having this conversation, which we didn't do 10 years ago. So, what elevations we choose to design for are going to be the next extremely important step in how we move forward, the impact it has to our community, the costs, but also the protection of life and property. In my opinion, we should choose a higher than lower, but that comes at a cost.
I think Courtney wants to speak.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. I was just, the questions are awesome. It's great to see the county doing this. I'm the city manager for the city of Satellite Beach, and we've done a lot of this before with this exact same team, well, most of them anyway. And what some of the questions, like with the glyphosate and and the stormwater ponds and ditches, our city, and a lot of residents don't realize this, but when you have entire operations dependent on this chemical, to help you, to get away from that is a lot harder than people realize. And it took us probably about 1.5 years to figure out how to get away from it. But we also are on the beach side. We're a very small city. We don't have a lot of open ponds and ditches. Most of our stormwater treatment is done underground with baffle boxes and exfiltration systems and so on. So we have nothing close to what the county has to take care of in terms of major ditches, major massive stormwater ponds. So it is very, very difficult to get away from those things. I do know that, and Bot can talk about this because, we work with the county very closely, and they did buy an excavator. We are starting to realize the cost that comes with that, the manual labor, and so on. And we've had to just make adjustments with, even just using it on our open spaces, like our fields, our athletic fields, and just making sure people understand, those weeds that are growing up near the fences, we're probably not going to be spraying those. those aren't gonna, it's not gonna look the same anymore. So it's just, I just want the public to understand how difficult that is to do, not just on a city level, but when you're looking at something as large as the county and the amount of facilities they have to maintain, it is a very difficult balance to take and, a balance to achieve. And getting away from it completely right away is probably not a realistic possibility at this point. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was, with building codes and things like that, our city has been looking at that for a long time. That is a challenge, just exactly what Randy said about, we have issues with roads, and, when we're looking at road flooding, and do we raise them? And those questions come up quite a bit. And you have to look at the area that you're doing that in, and economics comes into that. Do we, is the, juice worth the squeeze kind of, topic of discussion? So they're really, really hard questions, and it takes a lot of planning and a lot of work to answer those questions. And we aren't even close to, in our city, to answering those questions yet. We've been doing this for 10 years now, because that is a very hard topic to consider. And you also, when we're looking at infrastructure and facilities, just even looking at the future and moving them, and including sea level rise and our stormwater projections, making sure we're putting pipes in the right size to take care of what we think is going to happen 50 years down the road. So we don't get in a situation where we have to make the pipe bigger 10 years from now. It's a difficult thing to do. And that's why we have to do these, vulnerability studies frequently, update our projections, make sure that we are looking at the worst case scenario, because it is a financial issue. You don't want to pay for something that should have a life of 50 to 75 years, and then have to pay for it again 20 years from now because you didn't make sure that you looked at the worst case scenario and work with the best data that you have. So that's all I had to add. I just wanted to put that input in.
Thank you so much, Courtney. And we are approaching time. So with that, I'm gonna close and just thank everybody. We appreciate the time that you spent and the comments that you've provided, your input so far. And just keep your eye out for more opportunities to interact and engage with the county in these resiliency efforts moving forward. So thanks, everybody, and have a good evening.
Darcy, you're there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if we were staying on or not. I
Well,
see Tom.
I
Oh,
thought
good.
the Q&A at the end was extremely helpful and informative.
Are we good? Has everybody left or?
I'm still here.
Okay, all the attendees are gone.
Yeah, all the attendees are gone.
I kicked everybody out and then moved Tad and Bach and Virginia in here.
Oh, good.
Right.
Courtney did great. She was very diplomatic. That was awesome.
Yeah.